The air in the observatory was a stale, recycled thing, thick with the scent of old coffee and the faint, metallic tang of overworked machinery. Outside, the night was a suffocating blanket of black, stars mere pinpricks of light against an infinite void. Inside, I traced the glowing lines of the data stream, my fingers cold against the smooth plastic of the console. It was late, later than it had any right to be. The hum of the servers was a constant companion, a low thrumming that vibrated in my bones. My wife, Sarah, had loved the stars. She'd pointed them out to me on our first date, a shy smile playing on her lips as she'd named constellations I'd only ever seen as abstract patterns in textbooks. I poured myself into the work, into the numbers, into the endless, silent expanse above, a way to pretend I was still looking at something other than the empty space beside me in bed. The data was supposed to be routine, spectral analysis of a distant quasar, nothing more, but something was off, a flicker, a deviation, a whisper in the static that shouldn't have been there. I'd run the diagnostics 3 times. The equipment was functioning perfectly. Yet the anomaly persisted, a persistent blip on my screen, a tiny, discordant note in the symphony of the universe. It was like finding a misplaced word in a sacred text, a smudge on a masterpiece. I leaned closer, my breath misting the screen. The deviation was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A pattern, too regular to be random noise. It wasn't a known stellar phenomenon. It wasn't a glitch in the telescope's optics. It was something else. My heart, a muscle I usually ignored, gave a strange, insistent thump against my ribs. A knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach, a sensation I hadn't felt since the days before Sarah's diagnosis. This was different, though. I isolated the affected wavelengths. The signal was faint, buried deep within the cosmic background radiation, yet it possessed a peculiar structure. It wasn't chaotic. It was organized, intricate. I spent hours, then days, poring over the raw data, cross-referencing it with every known celestial event, every theoretical model. Nothing matched. The more I looked, the more the anomaly seemed to solidify, to take on a form. It was like staring into a fog and slowly discerning a shape within. The implications were unsettling. If this wasn't a natural occurrence, then what was it? An artificial signal. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, a prickling sensation that had nothing to do with the observatory's temperamental heating system. The sheer scale of the universe made the idea of intelligent life a statistical probability, of course. But this felt different. This felt ancient. The signal's signature suggested an origin point unimaginably far away, a time before humanity had even learned to harness fire. I started to neglect everything else. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Food was an afterthought, a few dry crackers shoved into my mouth between calculations. My colleagues noticed. The lead technician, a man whose gruff exterior hid a surprisingly sharp mind, stopped by my station. He looked concerned. "I read burning the candle at both ends, Thomas," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "Anything interesting?" I'd just shaken my head, unable to articulate the gnawing obsession that had taken root within me. How could I explain that I was chasing a ghost in the cosmic machine? They'd think I was losing my grip. Perhaps I was. The grief, I told myself, was making me see things. But the data was undeniably real. The anomaly wasn't just a static signal. It was a pulse, a rhythm, and it was changing. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, then with a growing insistence, the pattern began to evolve. It was like a language I couldn't understand, a complex syntax unfolding before my eyes, a language spoken across unimaginable gulfs of space and time. One evening, as a particularly potent storm raged outside, rattling the observatory's dome, I noticed a new development. The anomaly wasn't confined to that single quasar anymore. It was appearing in other readings. Faintly at first, then with increasing clarity, the same rhythmic signature was bleeding into other observational data. It was spreading. My hands trembled as I worked. The air in the observatory felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. The hum of the servers seemed to deepen, to take on a more ominous tone. I felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling that I was the only one who could see this unfolding. The universe, once a place of wonder and scientific inquiry, was beginning to feel watchful. The storm outside intensified, lightning lacing the sky in brief, searing flashes. The power flickered. For a terrifying moment, the screens went black. Then, with a surge, they blazed back to life, the data stream more vivid than before. The anomaly was clearer now, pulsing with a newfound intensity. It was a call, and it was getting louder. I stared at the screen, my mind a frantic whirl of equations and impossible conclusions. The data suggested a correlation, a connection between the spreading anomaly and something terrestrial, something ancient. My research had led me down a rabbit hole, and now I was beginning to suspect the bottom was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. What was this entity, and why was it suddenly making its presence known? The air in the observation dome tasted of recycled breath and stale coffee. Outside, the city lights bled into the bruised twilight, a familiar, comforting glow that did little to soothe the tremor in my hands. I'd spent weeks chasing shadows in the data, statistical anomalies that winked out of existence the moment I tried to pin them down. My colleagues, bless their pragmatic souls, offered commiserations and suggestions for sleep. They saw a man drowning in grief, not one teetering on the precipice of an impossible discovery. But then it happened again, a flicker, a distortion in the vast, silent canvas of space. It wasn't a solar flare, not a rogue comet. This was different. It was a pattern, a deliberate ripple in the fabric of what I understood. The signal, if I could call it that, was impossibly faint, like a breath on glass, yet it resonated with a complexity that defied any known astrophysical phenomenon. My heart, a traitorous organ that had long since ceased to beat with any rhythm but sorrow, began a frantic, uneven drumming against my ribs. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath misting the cool glass. The data streamed in, raw and untamed. For hours I wrestled with it, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my mind a frantic engine. I cross-referenced, I filtered, I ran diagnostics until my eyes burned. Every instinct screamed that this was real, that the universe was not the sterile, predictable place we'd so confidently mapped. The anomaly was a whisper, yes, but it was a whisper that carried the weight of millennia. It spoke of something ancient, something vast, something that observed from an unimaginable distance. I traced its path, or rather, its apparent origin. It wasn't a point, not a star. It was a pocket of non-existence that seemed to be expanding, contracting, breathing. The data coalesced, forming a shape that was both utterly alien and disturbingly familiar. It was a fractal, intricate and perfect, its lines impossibly sharp against the cosmic backdrop. It reminded me of something I'd seen before, something buried deep in the recesses of my memory. A child's drawing, a forgotten dream. Then the frequency shifted. The subtle hum in my headphones, which I'd dismissed as background static, sharpened. It resolved into a series of clicks and whistles, not random, but structured. A language. My blood, which had been racing, now felt sluggish, thick. I knew with a certainty that bypassed logic that this was not a natural phenomenon. This was communication, or perhaps a summons. My fingers froze above the keys. I was alone. The city outside was a distant murmur, unaware of the cosmic conversation that was unfolding or perhaps being imposed. I zoomed in on the anomaly, pushing the resolution to its absolute limit. The fractal pattern resolved further, revealing within its depths a suggestion of movement. Not the slow drift of celestial bodies, but a purposeful, intelligent motion. A wave of nausea washed over me. The anomaly wasn't just a point of interest, it was a beacon. And I, Thomas, astrophysicist and grieving widower, had just answered its call. I remembered a peculiar piece of research I'd stumbled upon years ago, a fringe archaeological theory about ancient earthworks. Specifically, a site in Scandinavia, a burial mound, legendary for its undisturbed nature, supposedly opened for the first time in millennia. The data I was seeing, the fractal patterns, the rhythmic pulses, they bore a disturbing resemblance to some of the abstract carvings described in that obscure paper. Could this cosmic anomaly somehow be connected to something terrestrial, something buried deep beneath the soil? The thought was absurd. The anomaly continued to grow on the screen, its intricate geometry expanding, seeming to consume the stars around it. This was no longer a ghost in the machine. This was something else, something that had been waiting, and now it had found me. What was it? And why was it showing itself to me now? The chill of the observatory felt less like a physical temperature and more like a seep into my bones. It had been days since I'd last seen sunlight or felt anything other than the hum of the servers and the gnawing emptiness in my gut. Sarah's photograph sat on my desk, her smile a marking ghost against the sterile glow of the monitors. Her absence was a constant pressure, a silent accusation. I'd pushed the city lights and the twilight away, focusing on the raw, unadulterated feed from the deep space array. The anomaly. It wasn't just a blip, a glitch in the cosmic background radiation. It was a pattern, intricate and deliberate, woven into the fabric of spacetime itself. My fingers danced across the keyboard, each keystroke a desperate plea for understanding. I was looking for a signature, a whisper of intelligence in the vast, indifferent dark. Then I found it. Not a sound, not a visual, but a ripple. A distortion in the gravitational lensing that shouldn't have been there. It was subtle, like a breath held too long, a pause in the universe's symphony. I isolated the coordinates, cross-referencing them with astronomical charts. A region of space so empty, so devoid of matter, that it was considered a cosmic dead zone. My breath hitched. This was impossible. Yet the data was undeniable. The ripple was originating from within this absolute nothingness. A paradox. Something was, there, actively bending the very laws of physics, and it was doing so from a place that should contain nothing. I ran simulations, pushing the processing power of the observatory to its limits. The anomaly wasn't static. It was growing, expanding, not in size but in complexity. New patterns emerged, fractal in their intricacy, hinting at a language I couldn't comprehend. He carried a steaming mug. Still at it, Thomas. I barely registered his presence. My gaze was locked on the unfolding patterns on the screen. It's not just data, I know, it's something more. He placed the mug on my desk, and brushing against Sarah's photograph, he paused, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. I need to rest, this obsession. It's not an obsession. I cut him off, my voice sharper than I intended. It's a revelation. It's the answer to everything we've ever wondered about. I pointed to the screen. Look, this distortion. It's not natural, it's directed. He leaned closer, his brow furrowed. He saw the lines, the curves, but I knew he didn't grasp the terrifying implications. He saw numbers, I saw a consciousness. And it's interacting with everything. He straightened up, a slight frown replacing his sympathy. Interacting how? The data shows a localized gravitational anomaly, nothing more. That's what they want us to see, I said, the words feeling heavy, foreign on my tongue. But it's a deception, a veil. The real interaction is deeper. It's influencing the very constants of the universe. Tiny, imperceptible shifts that are accumulating. He looked at me, a growing unease clouding his features. Thomas, that's a significant claim. I'd need proof. Proof. I had the data. I had the impossible ripple. But how could I explain the feeling? The sensation of being watched, not by eyes, but by something far more profound, far more alien. Later, alone again, the colleague gone, I continued to trace the anomaly's influence. It was closer, much closer. I ran a diagnostic on the observatory's own sensor logs, a routine check, and then I saw it. A subtle, almost undetectable fluctuation in the local gravitational field, logged weeks ago, dismissed as equipment error. It had occurred precisely when I'd been researching the anomaly's origin. My blood felt like ice water. The ripple wasn't just out there. It was here, now, and it knew I was looking. The air in the dome suddenly felt thinner, the hum of the machines a frantic, buzzing interrogation. I looked at Sarah's picture. Her smile seemed to dim. The universe wasn't just vast and indifferent, it was occupied, and something ancient, something immeasurably powerful, had just noticed my intrusion. I remembered a recent excavation, a local news report I'd barely paid attention to. A burial mound, opened for the first time in millennia, unearthed a trove of artifacts unlike anything seen before. Strange symbols, unidentifiable materials, a curiosity. Was it a coincidence? Or had the anomaly's influence, its subtle touch, reached even this quiet corner of the world, awakening something long dormant? The air in the research facility had always been sterile, a controlled environment of humming servers and the faint tang of ozone. Now it felt thick, cloying. My colleague, the one who usually offered a wry smile and a shared sigh over late nights, had grown distant. His eyes, usually sharp, seemed to glaze over when I spoke of the anomaly. He'd patted my shoulder, a gesture I now recognized as dismissal, and retreated to his own screens, leaving me with the echoing silence and the gnawing certainty that I was alone in this. I'd replayed the raw data 100 times. The spectral lines that shouldn't exist, the gravitational distortions that defied known physics. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the pattern. A faint, almost imperceptible pulse within the chaos, like a heartbeat in the void. It spoke of impassable distances, of epochs that dwarfed human history, of a consciousness so vast it made the universe itself seem like a single, fleeting thought. My wife, Elena. I saw her in the way the light caught dust motes in the lab, in the phantom scent of her jasmine perfume. It was that emptiness, I told myself, that made me so susceptible to seeing patterns where none existed. But the data was real. I needed to go deeper. The cosmic microwave background radiation, the faint afterglow of the Big Bang, held secrets older than stars. I rerouted processing power, pushing the supercomputers to their absolute limits. Hours bled into days. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, food a forgotten necessity. My world narrowed to the glowing monitors, the endless streams of numbers, and the ever-present hum that seemed to be growing louder, more insistent. Then it appeared, not a new signal, but a distortion within the existing data. I traced its trajectory, my fingers flying across the keyboard, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't a single event. There were others, faint echoes across the eons, on scales I could barely comprehend. Entire galaxies warped, stellar nurseries disrupted, entire nebulae twisted into impassable geometries. This wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was deliberate. My colleague found me slumped over my console, the blue light of the screens reflecting in my vacant eyes. He brought coffee, strong and black, the way I liked it. "Thomas," he'd said, his voice soft, concerned, "I need to rest." I'd waved him away, my gaze fixed on the screen. "Look," I'd rasped, pointing a trembling finger. "Look at this. It's not just a ripple, it's a signature." He'd peered at the data, his brow furrowed. He saw the anomalies, of course. He'd seen them before, but he didn't see it. He didn't feel the ancient, patient hunger that was encoded in the warping of space-time. "It's an artifact of the observation, Thomas," he'd said, his voice laced with that familiar, weary patience. "The instruments are sensitive. Sometimes they pick up. Noise. Noise. The word was a physical blow. He didn't understand. He couldn't. Later that night, the gnawing unease intensified. The hum of the facility seemed to shift, to deepen. It was no longer a mechanical drone, but something organic, something alive. I felt it in my teeth, a low vibration. I ran out of the lab, the sterile air suddenly suffocating. I needed space, air that wasn't recycled, air that hadn't been breathed by the machines that were slowly, inexorably mapping out the universe for it. I drove, aimlessly at first, then with a growing sense of purpose. I ended up at the outskirts of town, a place I hadn't visited in years, the old cemetery. I walked past the familiar granite markers, past the rows of silent, sleeping dead, and then I saw it. It was the burial mound. The one the local legends spoke of, the one that had been sealed for millennia. It had been opened, not by archaeologists, not by grave robbers. The earth around it was disturbed, yes, but not in the way of tools. It looked as if the ground itself had been torn open, ripped apart by an unimaginable force. This wasn't a coincidence. The data, the warping of light, the ancient pulse, and now this. A place of slumber disturbed. I walked towards it, drawn by an invisible current. The air around the opened mound was unnaturally still, devoid of the chirping of crickets or the rustle of leaves. I leaned over the edge, my heart racing a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. The scent that rose from the depths was ancient, earthy, and something else. Something metallic and wrong, like old blood and forgotten stars. It pulsed, mirroring the rhythm I'd found in the cosmic data. It was calling. Why had the burial mound been open now? What slumber had been disturbed? The concrete floor of the underground bunker was cold, seeping through my thin socks. The hum, the one that had started in my teeth and burrowed into my bones, was now a palpable presence. It wasn't just the ventilation system anymore. This sound vibrated with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a colossal heart beating in the Earth's core. I had retreated here, to the old seismic monitoring station my father had helped build, seeking refuge from the escalating strangeness at the observatory. But the bunker offered no solace. It amplified the noise, made it feel claustrophobic. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying metal, pressed in. I traced the condensation on the cold concrete wall, my fingers leaving streaks that quickly vanished. The data, the impossible readings that had drawn me here, were still displayed on the portable terminal. The sheer scale of it dwarfed everything I thought I knew about the universe. It dwarfed me. I remembered the last conversation with my wife. He'd been talking about the stars, about finding constellations in the mundane. They're not just random points of light, Thomas, he'd said, his eyes sparkling. They're stories, waiting to be read. I'd been too absorbed in my equations, too convinced of my own sterile logic to truly hear him. Now her words felt like a phantom limb, an ache for something I'd lost and could never reclaim. My gaze snapped back to the screen. The anomaly wasn't static. It pulsed, it shifted. And the shift, I realized with a lurch that twisted my gut, coincided with something else. I scrolled through historical celestial charts, my fingers flying across the touchscreen. There. A faint correlation, almost imperceptible at first, then undeniable. The anomaly's intensity spiked during specific cosmic phenomena, supernova, gamma-ray bursts, the rare alignment of distant quasars. It was as if the entity, whatever it was responding to these events. Or perhaps it was causing them. I'd always viewed the universe as a vast, indifferent stage. But what if it wasn't indifferent? What if it was a carefully orchestrated symphony? And this anomaly was the conductor's baton. I brought up the latest readings. The anomaly was currently in a state of heightened activity. Its signature was growing stronger, its influence spreading like an unseen tide. And then I saw it. A predicted celestial event, a gravitational lensing of a distant galaxy cluster, scheduled for precisely 2 weeks from now. The data was unequivocal. The anomaly would reach its zenith during this alignment. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a convergence. My breath hitched. This wasn't just observation. This was preparation. The entity wasn't just a passive observer. It was an architect, a weaver of cosmic destinies. And this impending event, it felt like a doorway that was being deliberately opened. My father, ever the pragmatist, had dismissed them as folklore. But the mound had been undisturbed for millennia, a silent sentinel on the rolling hills. There were stories, too, of strange lights and unsettling dreams associated with the place. I'd always attributed them to the isolation, the vast emptiness of the plains. But now, the hum, the vibration, felt like it was emanating from the earth itself. I pulled up a geological survey of the area, cross-referencing it with the known coordinates of the anomaly's strongest terrestrial resonance. The strongest point of influence, the nexus of this cosmic disturbance, was directly beneath the burial mound. The burial mound opened for first time in millennia. The words flashed in my mind, a sudden, terrifying premonition. The stars weren't just stories, they were blueprints, and something ancient, something vast, was about to begin construction. What was it building? And why was the burial mound the key? The chill of the concrete floor had become a secondary concern. My focus narrowed to the sound, a resonant thrumming that seemed to originate not from the bunker's machinery, but from the very earth beneath it. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was a deep, guttural pulse, like the slow, rhythmic beat of a gargantuan heart. My breath hitched. The access panel to the old research wing, the one I'd forced open with a crowbar, now felt like a gateway to something far more profound and terrifying than dusty equipment. I had to tell someone. The data, the calculations, the sheer impossibility of it all. It couldn't be mine alone to bear. My fingers fumbled for my burner phone, the cheap plastic slick with a sudden, clammy sweat. The contact list was sparse. Colleagues from my past life, people who dismissed my theories even before Alara. But there was one. A former supervisor, a man named Dr. Thorne, who'd always possessed a grudging respect for my analytical prowess, even if he'd often rolled his eyes at my more speculative endeavors. The dial tone felt too loud in the oppressive silence. Each ring was a hammer blow against my frayed nerves. "Thomas, is that really you?" Thorne's voice, gruff and familiar, cut through the static. "Doctor, Thorne, I need your help. It's about the anomaly, the one from the deep space arrays." My voice cracked, betraying the tremor in my hands. A pause. "Thomas, haven't we discussed this? Those readings were artifacts, atmospheric interference. You know how it is with that kind of sensitive equipment." His tone was patient, but edged with a weariness that suggested he'd dealt with this before. With me, "No, it's not interference. I've cross-referenced. I've run every simulation. It's a signal, but not like anything we understand. It's alive, and it's changing things." The words tumbled out, a desperate torrent. I described the subtle shifts in stellar evolution, the impassable gravitational anomalies, the way the very fabric of space seemed to be responding. "Thomas, you sound distressed," Thorne said, his voice softening, but the underlying skepticism remained. "Are you sure you're getting enough rest? You've been through a great deal." My jaw tightened. "This isn't about Alara, this is real. I'm in an old government bunker, an abandoned research facility. I found something in the old seismic logs, something about a burial mound opened for first time in millennia, and the readings, they're connected." Another longer pause. "Thomas, what are I talking about? That sounds like folklore and a government bunker. I need to come back. We can get I help." "Help? I don't need help. I need I to listen." My voice rose, bordering on a shout. "The data is irrefutable. The entity, it's ancient, vast, and it's not just observing. It's doing something. It's unraveling things." The word felt inadequate, pathetic, to describe the cosmic horror I was glimpsing. "Thomas, I can't do this over the phone. I'm clearly not thinking straight. I'm going to contact someone who can come and get I. Just stay put. Don't do anything rash." "No, don't," but the line went dead. No one believed me. Thorne, of all people, he thought I was losing my mind. The weight of the knowledge, the isolation, pressed down on me. The bunker felt smaller now, the air thicker, harder to draw into my lungs. The pulse beneath my feet grew stronger, a relentless, ancient rhythm. Had I imagined the connection to the burial mound? Was it just another symptom of my fractured state? I looked around the dimly lit space. The rusted metal shelves, the discarded equipment, the peeling paint on the walls, it all seemed to mark my attempts at reason. The hum vibrated in my teeth, a constant, gnawing reminder. If no one would listen, then I had to find proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. What else was hidden down there, waiting to be discovered? The chill in the bunker wasn't just the damp concrete seeping into my bones. It was the cold dread of Thorne's disbelieving voice echoing in my mind. He'd hung up. Just like that. The last thread of my sanity, the last person I thought might listen, severed. I was alone with the impossible. My hands trembled as I keyed in the final access codes. The data streams flickered across the monitors, a chaotic ballet of numbers and spectral lines that no terrestrial instrument could have generated. This wasn't just anomalous. It was alive. I had to see it, not just on the screens, but there. The coordinates I'd painstakingly extracted pointed not to a distant nebula or a rogue quasar, but to a place far closer, far more ancient. It was a few hours' drive from my secluded research facility, a place I'd always dismissed as superstition, a relic of a less enlightened age. Now it was the only place that mattered. The air outside the bunker was sharp, biding with the first hint of an autumn frost. The sky was a bruised purple, the stars beginning to prick through the fading twilight. Each mile felt like a step closer to a precipice, a point of no return. I kept replaying Thorne's words, his patronizing tone, his easy dismissal. He couldn't understand. He couldn't see. No one could. The turnoff was barely a track, overgrown and choked with weeds. Branches scraped against the car's paintwork, a furious protest against my intrusion. Only the rustling of unseen things in the undergrowth and the frantic beating of my own heart broke the stillness. I killed the headlights. A faint glow, not from the moon or stars, pulsed on the horizon. It was a sickly, phosphorescent green, pulsing with that same unnerving rhythm I'd detected in the cosmic data. It emanated from the direction of the mound. My breath hitched. This was it, the convergence. I got out of the car. The ground was uneven, soft, with decaying leaves that crunched underfoot. The air grew heavy, thick with an odor I couldn't place, something like ozone mixed with damp earth and something else. Something metallic and ancient like old blood. My skin prickled. It wasn't just a hill. It was a structure, its sides smoothed by millennia of wind and rain, but the top was a ragged scar, a fresh wound. The earth had been disturbed. It was as if something had clawed its way out. A low thrumming began, a sound that vibrated not in my ears, but in my teeth, in my very bones. It was the pulse, amplified, resonating from the opened earth. The green light pulsed in time with it, growing brighter, then dimming, like a colossal, dying heart. I walked towards the mound, my legs moving as if guided by an unseen force. The crunch of leaves underfoot was drowned out by the thrum. The metallic, ancient smell intensified. I could feel the ground tremble beneath my feet. It wasn't just a mound anymore. It was a gateway, and whatever was on the other side was making its presence known. The sky above, once a familiar expanse of stars, was now a swirling vortex of impassable colors, the constellations themselves seeming to warp and shift. Reality itself felt thin, stretched to its breaking point. My hands were numb. My vision swam. The green light was blinding now, a searing emerald inferno erupting from the heart of the burial mound. And then, from the depths of the opened earth, a shape began to emerge. It was too vast, too alien to comprehend. A distortion in space, a ripple in existence. I stumbled back, my mind reeling, trying to reconcile the impassable sight with the rational world I'd once inhabited. The universe wasn't empty. It was occupied. And now it was looking directly at me, at Earth, through this gaping maw in the ancient soil. My fingers fumbled in my coat pocket, finding the small, tarnished locket. My wife's face, smiling, seemed to mark me from the silver frame. He was gone. But this, everything, the thought spurred a desperate, primal surge of defiance. I couldn't let it. I wouldn't. The blinding green light pulsed, and the impassable shape continued its ascent. It was a violation. A desecration of everything I knew, everything I loved. The thrumming was a physical force, pushing against me, threatening to tear me apart. My body screamed in protest, my senses overloaded. There had to be a way, a counter-frequency, a disruptive pattern. I scrambled back towards the car, my eyes fixed on the unfolding horror. The servers, the data. There had to be something in the data that could fight this. A weakness, a key. As I reached the car, my gaze was drawn back to the mound. The shape was almost fully formed, colossal entity of pure, annihilating presence. The green light pulsed one last time, a blinding flash that seared my retinas, and then the thrumming stopped. The light vanished. What had been unleashed? And what was I supposed to do now? The hum. It was still there, a low thrumming beneath the silence. Not the absence of sound, but a sound that had always been there, just too subtle for me to notice before. Like the blood in my own veins, or the slow, patient turning of the planet. Now it was the only sound. Thorne's voice, the clatter of his receiver, the frantic beat of my own heart, all were gone, swallowed by this deeper resonance. I stood in the middle of the observation chamber. The screens that had once blazed with starlight and spectral lines were dark, inert. The complex equations that had consumed my life, the very language of the cosmos I'd thought I understood, now felt like nursery rhymes scribbled on a chalkboard. They were meaningless. They had to be, because the data, the impossible data, had led me here, to this place. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something ancient, like dust that had never known sunlight. It clung to the back of my throat, a metallic tang that made me want to gag. I ran a hand over the cold metal of the console, my fingers tracing patterns that seemed to writhe in my peripheral vision. They weren't there when I looked directly. They had started after Thorne's call, faint at first, like wind rustling through dry leaves. Then they coalesced, sharpening into a chorus of guttural clicks and drawn-out vowels that defied any known linguistic structure. They weren't in my ears, not really. They were inside my skull, resonating with the hum. I had to see, I had to understand. The The data had pointed me towards the coordinates not of a star but of a place on Earth. Thorne had called me mad. Perhaps he was right. But madness, I was beginning to suspect, was merely a different kind of perception. The bunker's reinforced door, a monstrosity of steel and concrete, had groaned open with a sound like a dying beast. It had been designed to withstand a direct impact, to shield me from the world. Now it felt like a cage. I had no choice but to leave. The hum was pulling me. My boots crunched on loose gravel as I stepped out. The night air was surprisingly cool, carrying the scent of pine and decaying leaves. Above, the sky was an inky black, devoid of stars. Not just obscured by clouds, but empty. It was a profound wrongness that settled in my gut, a visceral unease that dwarfed any fear I'd ever known. The terrain grew rougher, the trees thicker, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snag my clothes. Then I saw it, a clearing, and in the center, a mound of earth, ancient and imposing. Thorne had mentioned it in passing, a local legend dismissed by rational minds. But the data had shown a confluence of energies originating from this very spot. The mound was unnaturally symmetrical, its peak a perfect dome against the starless sky. And at its summit, where the earth should have been undisturbed, there was an opening, a gaping maw, as if the ground itself had been ripped open. The edges of the fissure glowed with a faint, phosphorescent light, a sickly green that pulsed in time with the hum. This was it, the source. I approached cautiously, my breath catching in my chest. The smell of decay was stronger here, mingled with the sharp, sterile scent of ozone. It wasn't a cave, not in the geological sense. The walls shimmered, not with rock, but with something fluid, something that seemed to absorb and refract the scant light. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were thoughts, impressions, alien concepts that clawed at my consciousness. Images flashed behind my eyes. Vast, geometric structures that defied Euclidean principles, celestial bodies arranged in patterns that marked all known physics, and a pervasive sense of an intelligence so immense, so ancient, it made the universe itself seem like a fleeting thought. The data hadn't just shown me anomalies. It had shown me a presence, a consciousness that had been here observing for eons, and it was awake. It had been awakened by something. By me. A single, impossibly large shard of crystalline material, glowing with that same phosphorescent light, floated in the center of the opening. It pulsed, a slow, deliberate beat, and with each pulse, the hum intensified, vibrating through the very bones of the earth. It was the heart of the anomaly, the nexus. I felt a pull, a subtle but irresistible force drawing me towards the edge. It wasn't a physical tug, but a mental one. A siren song of forbidden knowledge and ultimate understanding. They promised to show me the true nature of reality, the secrets that lay hidden beneath the veneer of our mundane existence. My hand trembled as I reached out, my fingers inches from the glowing shard. The air crackled with unseen energy. The ground beneath my feet began to tremble, not with an earthquake's violence, but with a deep, resonant shudder. The opening widened, the phosphorescent light flaring, bathing the clearing in an unearthly glow. I was standing on the precipice of something that would redefine everything. The loss of Alina, the futility of my life's work, all of it seemed to shrink in significance before this colossal, terrifying truth. I am seen. And then the ground gave way. Not a collapse, but a dissolution. The earth beneath me simply ceased to be. I was falling, but not downwards. It was a disorienting, multi-directional descent, a tumbling through impassable geometries and shifting colors. Was this the end? Or was it merely the beginning of a transformation I could never comprehend? The air tore, not a sound but a sensation, a ripping like existence itself was being shredded. I had been falling, yes, but that was a crude approximation of the truth. It was more of a unfolding. The world I knew, the comforting, familiar physics had simply ceased to apply. Now there was only this. I was in the burial mound opened for first time in millennia. The words, dredged from some forgotten corner of my mind, echoed without sound. The space was vast, impassably so, yet intimate. The earth beneath my feet was not earth at all, but a swirling, phosphorescent dust that pulsed with a faint, internal light. The stone walls, if they could be called that, writhed with patterns that defied geometry, shifting and reforming like liquid thought. The hum was a physical pressure now, vibrating in my bones, in my teeth. The whispers had coalesced, not into words, but into a single resonant chord that thrummed with an ancient, unfathomable consciousness. My wife, Elena. Her face, a memory I clung to with desperate ferocity, flickered at the edges of my vision, a phantom limb of my soul. There was she here, there was this where he had gone. The thought was a fragile thing, easily crushed by the immensity of this place. I tried to move, to stand, but my limbs felt disconnected, like puppets on fraying strings. The dust swirled around me, warm and strangely comforting, like a forgotten embrace. It smelled of ozone and something else, something deeper, older, like the scent of the first stars being born. The patterns on the walls intensified. They weren't just shifting, they were communicating. Not in a language I could understand, but in a way that bypassed my intellect, speaking directly to some primal part of me. Images, sensations, entire epochs flashed through my awareness. The birth of galaxies, the silent ballet of nebulae, the slow, agonizing decay of suns. And within it all a presence, not malevolent, not benevolent, simply there. An observer, a sculptor, a weaver of destinies. This was the intelligence, the one I had glimpsed in the cold, hard data. It wasn't an alien race, not a singular entity in the way I understood. It was the universe itself, or a consciousness of the universe, playing out its grand, terrible design. And Earth, my small, fragile home, was merely a single thread in its impassably complex tapestry. They weren't words, but feelings, a profound understanding of my insignificance. They showed me how my pursuit of knowledge, my desperate need to understand, had led me to this precipice. It was not a trap, not a punishment. It was simply the next step. I saw myself not as Thomas, the grief-stricken astrophysicist, but as something else. A node, a point of awareness within the greater consciousness. The data I had found, the anomalies, they weren't errors. They were echoes, ripples from this entity, touching upon my reality, drawing me in. The dust settled, and the patterns on the walls resolved into something clearer. Not images, but equations. Not equations of physics, but of existence. The fundamental laws of being laid bare, and I understood. Not with my mind, but with my very essence. The universe wasn't governed by blind chance or immutable laws. It was guided, orchestrated, and the conductor's baton was held by something far beyond comprehension. My grief for Elena, once a crushing weight, felt distant, almost trivial. It was a human emotion, a flicker in the vastness. Yet even in this cosmic revelation, a sliver of that human pain remained, a testament to the love that had once been. The hum reached its crescendo, a pure, piercing note that seemed to vibrate the very atoms of my being. The dust swirled faster, forming eddies and currents. I felt myself being drawn into one, not with resistance, but with a strange, passive acceptance. What was happening to me? There was I being absorbed, transformed, or simply understood. The last vestiges of my individual consciousness began to blur, merging with the resonant chord of this ancient intelligence. I was becoming part of the fabric, a single pixel in an infinite, ever-shifting image. The last thing I perceived was a sense of immense, overarching purpose, a tapestry so vast and intricate that my own existence was but a single, luminous stitch. The silence was not an absence of sound, but a different kind of presence, a quiet understanding that permeated everything. Had I found resolution, or had I merely become a part of the mystery?